Hello, hello, and welcome to my thought on this gloomy but much cooler Saturday in London. I've been thinking about the fact that we're all afraid of failure, and I definitely am. I don't try for things I don't think I can get, and many things I don't think I can get, I probably could. But they say that your failures are the road to success. And they talk about how Einstein had so many failures before he finally figured out the theory of relativity. Uh, Failure paves the way to success. And in my case, uh, that's true. Because my biggest failure was when I was 30, and I staked everything on getting my journalism degree from Stanford and getting a job to be able to support myself. And I invested all the money I had left because I did not get a scholarship. I invested all the money I had left. Uh, I gave up all my ties to Ohio, um, and I went to Palo Alto um, to become a journalist. And I don't believe in anything I've ever done, I've ever worked as hard as I worked then, because I didn't have any of the undergraduate requirements to get a master's degree. And I did both my undergraduate requirements and my graduate requirements. I graduated with all A's in 14 months. And they had told me that it would take a little better than 2 years. And when I got out, the world was supposed to await, and it did not. And I could not get any kind of job in journalism. And the hope that I had after two um, miserable divorces, the hope that I had to support myself was gradually going out the window. But I kept trying and I kept failing. I applied for when I couldn't get any jobs in any of the newspapers in the Bay Area, and I tried many, many times, and I was refused. Then I tried public relations, which I would have been lousy at, and I failed. And then I went to New York because I thought that was where the opportunities were, and I failed. But while I was busy failing and getting a job, I was making inroads in the freelance market and beginning to earn a living. And then I came back to Toledo because after New York, that failure was too much for me, and I had a complete nervous breakdown. And my father came to pick me up, as he always did when I fell apart, um, and took me back to Toledo. And I tried to get a job at the Toledo Blade, and I failed. But while I was doing that, I've told this story before, I thought, well, the one thing I didn't want to do was teach. And the reason I didn't want to teach is because I was not really a very good teacher, although some people would contest that who were in my classes because I was a lot of fun. But uh, I just loved them. And I think, in a way, love is the best teacher. So, thanks to a woman named Susan Bannister, I managed to get a job in the Community and Technical College in Toledo University because at that point I would take anything because I had to pay the rent and I had to live, and I couldn't get a job in what I had worked so hard to do. So I failed. But I have to say that those 6 years were the best year that I taught at college, were the best years of my life. And because I was teaching art appreciation, well, not the best years, but up until then, the best years, because these are the best years right now of my life. Um, but because I was teaching art appreciation and I didn't know how to paint, I took a painting. And as you can see when you look around, this is about 50% of my life and has been ever since then. And that was all because I failed to get a job in journalism. And then I had this wonderful experience of teaching these wonderful, wonderful students at the Community and Technical College for 6 years. Um, I had that job because I failed at getting the journalism job. And I continued doing a freelance and I continued applying to the Toledo Blade and failing. And I got several stories in the magazine section of the Toledo Blade, and I thought, well, now they'll hire me, but they didn't. Uh, so that was more failure. And then I was writing for a magazine called Impresario, and I thought, well, he'll hire me, uh, but he didn't. So I applied. I kept applying to jobs and failing. And finally, I got a job in Oklahoma City that was a complete disaster. But I gave up everything because I gave up my mobile home. I took my 2 dogs and 2 cats by that time. Uh, and I left Oregon, Ohio, which was a suburb of Toledo, and invested everything. Now I had the dream job. I was writing for a magazine and 2 newspapers, and that failed. And because of that failure, I did my year-and-a-half tour of Southwest United States, and that was another absolutely magnificent time of my life where I got to see the country. I met people I never would have met before. I learned about what was real and what was important. I never would have done that if I'd gotten that journalism job when I was 30. And then, that fell apart, and I decided to go back and try again where um, where I had failed, and I decided to go back to California and Stanford on almost no money because I never did have money after I graduated from Stanford. I was always very, very poor, and it was always a fight to feed myself, but I always did. And I came back to California, to Palo Alto, and I wrote my darling friend Bob Lynn, who was the editor by that time of the Palo Alto Times. I had written for him while I was trying to prove that I could write. I had written for him for nothing when he was the editor of the Burlingame Advanced Star and Green Sheet. Isn't that a wonderful name? But when I wrote him, of course, he said no, there were no job openings, because it seems that whenever I applied for jobs during this period, there were never any job openings, although people were hired on the day before and the day after, but always the day that I applied. So I failed, and I ended up selling sex and not knowing it at the dating service, and failed. But because I was a failure and because I had no money, uh, and I love theater, I ended up ushering and working for theater companies, and I got to see some of the finest theater and the finest opera and the finest symphony that is in the vernacular in San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area. And I continued to do that for the next 30 years, all because I failed at getting a job and couldn't afford to pay for tickets, and I failed. And then I got a job with the Pacifica Tribune writing a column, and I thought, well, maybe they would hire me, but they didn't. Instead, they paid me $25, I believe it was 25 or 35 a column, and that was once a week. And they paid me also the same amount to write feature stories for them, but I was not hired, so I did not have any job benefits or anything that was helping me toward when I would be too old to work. Of course, I didn't know that I would end up never being too old to work, but I was doing that, so I failed. And I thought, okay, I'm writing a weekly column. I'm doing at least 2 features for them. I'm working 18 hours a day for them. Maybe I can ask for more money. And when I asked for more money, my darling Chris Hunter said to me, who was the editor, he said, we don't have it in the budget, so we can't hire you. And so I failed again. And because I failed again, and I was still looking for that journalism job, I never did give up. Um, I saw the San Francisco Comedy College, and I thought, this is my big chance, because I'll write, this time I'm going to write something that's going to get into the New York Times. Now, finally, after 40 years, I was 70, so it's 40 years, I'm going to get that job that I wanted, that I set my heart on when I was 30 and had nothing and decided to rebuild my life. And I wrote that story, and I didn't get that job, but that failure put me in the comedy circuit. And from the comedy circuit, I've done cabaret. And thanks to Lennon Smith, I started doing shows on theater shows. And that led to my 3 storytelling shows, which were all 5-star shows. Um, and that led to my being in some movies, and led eventually to my coming to London. So that so what I'm saying to you is, and these were failures, and I was a complete failure. And I think that it is important. First of all, I think it's important for you who are listening to this not to think that your attempts, not to think of them as failures, but to think of them as steps to the next phase of your life. Because when I look back, I realize that's what they were. And I'll tell you, and those of you who follow me know that I'm not being Pollyanna. I have never, ever dreamed that I would have the happiness, the success, the excitement, and the fun that I have had since I started comedy. That's 16 years. 16 years of never, ever looking back and saying, I want that journalism job because I don't want it anymore. I found my calling. And you'll find it too. But don't label yourself a failure as I did. Don't make that mistake. Those are just steps to the next phase of your life. And thank you so much for joining me on my thought on this lovely, balmy Saturday in London.